So what we have here is a branching key. So you can see that what we've got is we've got a series of questions, and after each question you've got two options which are on branches from that question, and basically you've just got to follow it from the top to the bottom. So if I put my quadrat down in my ecosystem and I had some flowers in front of me, I could then use this key to identify what those flowers were. So the first question is asking me what colour are the flowers. I'd look and I'd see that if those flowers were blue, I'd carry on down the left hand side of the key. What is the texture of the fruits is the next question. If I look and I find that the fruits are fleshy, I carry on down that left hand side and I find out that that's species 1, and that's what I would record. Now obviously this is a very simplistic version of a branching key, but basically that's all it is. It's a series of questions, and each question leads to another until eventually the name of the organism is found. Now what we're interested in is actually something that's called a paired statement key. Instead of asking questions at branching points, you're asked to choose between two statements. So each question has two statements, and then after you've read the statement it will lead you to an instruction which will lead you to another question, and you just follow it through. So here's an example here. So I've got all these organisms in front of me. I have no idea what they are, and then you've got a very simple paired statement key here. Again, you start at the very top. So I'm looking at let's say I'm looking at this particular organism here, that one there. I have no idea what that is. So I'm going to use my paired statement key to work out how to identify it. So I start at question 1. Does the animal have 4 legs? I can't actually see its legs, but I'm sure if I was out in the field, I'd see that actually no, it doesn't have 4 legs. It's only got 2. So I go to no at the right hand side of the statement, and I need to go to statement 4. So number 4, does the animal have webbed feet? Yes. Therefore, it's a duck. So it's just a nice simplistic version of a paired statement key. So rather in branches, you've got options. So here, the options kind of negate each other. Does the animal have 4 legs? It doesn't have 4 legs. Does the animal have a curly tail? It doesn't have a curly tail. Does the animal have a hoof divided into 2 parts? Does the animal not have a hoof divided into 2 parts? Okay, so it's a bit of a paired statement key where you've got like the contradiction within the questions. So what we're going to get you to do is on your Google form is practice using paired statement keys. So in your first question, you've got these 6 organisms here, A to F, and I want you to use this paired statement key to identify the name of the Latin binomial that you can see, the name of these organisms. So again, always start with question 1. So if I was looking at A, I start off with the first question. You can see it's got 2 statements. Has it got a green coloured body or has it got a purple body? If it's got a green coloured body, then you go to question 2. If it's got a purple coloured body, then go to question 4. And then follow the statements through until you get to the red lettering, which is the name of that specific organism. Have a go at it on a piece of paper first before you then fill in your Google form, and just check your understanding of that. The second question is very, very similar. So here I've got a whole range of organisms, and again I want you to use the paired statement key to find out what the letter is for each of these organisms. Once you've found out the letter for each of the organisms, those letters in line will spell out a word, and I want you to put in the Google form what the word is that these aliens are spelling out when you've used your classification key to identify what the letter is. So that's using a paired statement key. The next thing we're going to look at is how we build a paired statement key, which is a little bit more complicated. Now, here I've got a selection of vertebrates. All a vertebrate is an animal with a backbone. When you are setting up a paired statement key, it's really important to use obvious visible characteristics. So ideally not saying things like, oh, it's found in the grassland, because at the point when you're sampling it, it might not be there. Also, trying to avoid where possible where it's like, oh, it makes a clicking noise. Again, it might not make a noise when you're out sampling it, and so that's going to be no use. It has to be obvious, visible, so things that you can see characteristics. So you can have a look at these pictures, and there's some really easy ones here, like the number of legs. Some of them have got 4 legs, some of them have got 2, some of them have got no legs at all. Other visible characteristics might be it has feathers, or it has fur, or it has scales. Okay, other visible characteristics might be the colour of the organism. So those are the sorts of things that you could be using to construct your paired statement key. So to give you a bit of an example of how I've done this, is I've had a go at constructing the paired statement key. Now the first thing I've done is when I've looked at these organisms, I've split them into a group of 2. Now I can easily split these organisms into 2 groups based on the number of their legs. Now, when I'm constructing a paired statement key, my first question is going to be, well, does the animal have legs? My second statement always has to be the opposite. So the animal does not have legs. Now, at the minute, I've got two animals that have legs, the chicken and the cow, and then I've got a number of animals that don't have the legs, the snake and the fish. I'm sure I've missed one anyway. So I can't identify any specific organisms, so therefore I've got to lead my questions on. So if the animal has legs, I'm going to put a second question in that's going to further identify those organisms. If the animal doesn't have legs, I'm going to put again another further question in that's going to identify those organisms. So question 2, I'm dealing with the animals that have legs, so that's the cow and the chicken. Now here I can put a question that will split those two animals down to their individual identities. So the animal has 4 legs. Well, there was only one animal there that had 4 legs, and that was the cow. So my answer after this particular statement is, well, if you've got an animal that has legs and it's got 4 legs in front of you out of that big group, then you have identified the cow. The animal has 2 legs. Again, there's only one option. If the animal has legs and it has 2 legs, there was only one option out of that group of animals, so therefore it's the chicken. I then move on to question 3. Now remember, question 3 is dealing with animals that do not have legs. So that was my fish and my snake. Now here, again, I can ask 2 questions that will split them down to the individual identification of them. The animal has fins. There was only one organism there that didn't have legs and had fins, and that was the fish. The animal does not have fins. Again, there was only one organism there that didn't have fins and didn't have legs, and that was the snake. And so therefore, I've built up a paired statement key. So we can have another little go with something a little bit more difficult, which is invertebrates. So invertebrates are organisms that don't have a backbone. And remember to use obvious visible characteristics. So again, here it could be like the number of legs, it could be the number of antennae, whether it's got a tail or not, how many legs it's got, whether it's got wings. Again, not advisable to say things like, does it build a web, or, what sound it makes, because those things might not be happening at the time that you sample. So again, having a go at building a statement key, I've started off, as I did before, splitting the group into 2 sections. So my first question is, does the invertebrate have 6 legs, or does it have more than 6 legs? There was 2 organisms there that had 6 legs, and there was 2 organisms there that had more than 6 legs. So there was like the earwig and the wasp, and then there was the centipede or millipede, whatever it is, and then the spider. So right this minute, because there's 2 organisms within each group, I can't identify down to a single organism, so I've got to put in another question. So we'll deal with the invertebrates that have 6 legs first, and I've got to go to question 2 to ask a further question. So those organisms that had 6 legs, so I had my earwig and I had my wasp, okay, I can easily split those 2 or apart by a visible characteristic, which is whether they had wings. One of them had wings and one of them didn't. So my question is going to be, does the invertebrate have wings? If it did, then it was the wasp. Okay, if it didn't, it was the earwig. Okay, and I've led my paired statement key down to the individual identification. My third question is dealing with those organisms that had more than 6 legs, so the spider and the centipede, millipede, I don't know what it is. So again, I'm going to ask the question, does the invertebrate have 8 legs, or does it have more than 8 legs? Well, the only one that's got 8 legs is the spider, and the one that had more than 8 legs was the centipede. I'm going to go with, looks like a centipede. Okay, but though I've used those questions, I could have used something different. I could have used, does it have antennae or not? Okay, and I might have started off my first question like the invertebrate has antennae. Go to question 2, the invertebrate doesn't have antennae. It would be the spider. And then in my question 2, I might have said, right, well, all these ones that have antennae, it has wings. It would have been the wasp. It doesn't have wings. I'd go to question 3. And then my third question might be, it has 6 legs. It would be the earwig. It has more than 6 legs. It would be the centipede. So there's lots of different ways that you can do this correctly. Okay, there are many right answers, but just make sure that you're using visible characteristics. So here's another example. And again, when you're faced with lots of organisms, it's really important to think about what are the visible characteristics you could use. So don't, be talking about how it moves or anything like that, because again, it might not do that at the time. Think about what the visible characteristics are here. So I've got some organisms here that lots of people might not have seen before, that live within rivers and seas. You could be things like, it has a shell or it doesn't have a shell. It has a hard casing like the mayfly, the freshwater shrimp, the caddisfly larvae and the stonefly, or it's soft bodied like the flatworm and the limpet. How many tails does it have? Does it have 2 tails like the stonefly? Does it have 3 tails like the mayfly? How many legs it has? Those sorts of characteristics are what you should be using when you're trying to build your paired statement key. Now this is a little bit of a tricky task, so what I've done is I have put on a form for you 3 options. Okay, all I want you to do is I want you to choose one of the options and build your own paired statement key. So it might be that you're choosing these animals here. They're all cats. I want you to try and see if you can build a paired statement key identifying the 4 different cats. So the cheetah, the jaguar, the lion and the tiger. Or you could do constructing a paired statement key like this for the spider, the wasp, the fly and the springtail. This is a little bit more easy because you're given visible characteristics that you could possibly use, like the number of legs, the wings and whether it has a body stripe or not. So you could use that. Or this one here where it is different plants. They are going in order of difficulty. You could have a go at all 3 or you could just choose one. Okay, so choose something that is suitable for your level. So here again it's a little bit more straightforward because you've got visible characteristics that you could use, like presence of chlorophyll, presence of cones, presence of flowers, and is it aquatic. However, a little bit more difficult because we're dealing with lots more plants. So there's a level of difficulty and I will put them in order for you. Also on your Google form there are some exam questions for you to have a look at, so you can see how this is actually assessed within the exam. A lot of the questions are like this, where rather than actually building a whole paired statement key, you're asked to fill in the missing bits. So using the information in the table, try and figure out what should have been in the key A, B and C. And there's 2 examples of that on your Google form. So have a go at that. Remember, what we're trying to do this lesson is firstly, in those first questions, is assess how well you can use a paired statement key to identify organisms, and then secondly, can you actually construct a paired statement key to sample organisms within an ecosystem? So good luck.